Our gospel reading this morning is familiar, but as so often happens, especially with the gospels, that doesn't stop it from being challenging once you slow down and ask some questions about it. It begins simply enough. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. So what we're picturing here is an enclosure with a wall that's not that high. It's mostly intended to keep sheep in. It can keep some predators out too, but some predators, lions for instance, would have no trouble jumping over it. The protection against predators comes mostly from the fact that the sheepfold is built near a town, and wild animals avoid towns. The shepherds come in the morning, and they call their sheep out of the fold. Often there would have been several flocks sharing the same enclosure for the night, and then they take them out to the countryside in order to graze them. But the fold itself is in a central location on the outskirts of a population center, and therefore it's pretty safe from predators of the four-footed variety. But there are other predators of a two-footed variety who are cannier by far and who don't fear the towns, who in fact live in the towns. And maybe they can't leap like lions, but they can climb. Though the sheep are still not completely safe. But in this world, whoever is completely safe. But the shepherd wants the sheep to be safe. That's why he closes them in the fold for the night, so they can't wander off in ones and twos, making things easy for the rustlers and getting away from the town and out where the wild animals roam. It's also why he shows up each morning and takes them in and out to find pasture. And the point of this illustration, well, what is the point of this illustration? It's clearly not that Jesus is trying to figure out some robber-proof architecture for a sheepfold. He's trying to sketch a fundamental difference between the shepherd and the thieves. The shepherd enters by the door. To him the gatekeeper opens, because he belongs there. Because he's trying to help the sheep and help them thrive. And even the sheep know this in their way because he's familiar and he always leads them to food, so they follow his voice. The sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow. That's the shepherd. He uses the front door because he's there to help. The thief has to climb over the wall because he isn't there to help, but rather to help himself to some lamb. He's not planning to take the sheep out to pasture. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. And we might ask, well, what didn't they understand? So far, it's pretty easy, and we don't even have personal experience with sheepfolds ourselves. Shepherd, good for the sheep, uses the door. Thief, bad for the sheep, climbs over the wall. But why is Jesus bothering to tell them this, especially since they know all about sheepfolds? Surely he hasn't decided to monologue about shepherds and robbers. He's not filibustering. What's he getting at? And when we consider the context of his speech, we see that the hearers had an excellent reason to be sure that Jesus was getting at something, and something very pointed and something very present, not just general deeper meaning, because the context is a quarrel with the Pharisees. In fact, it's something that we had not too long ago in our gospel reading, the fourth Sunday in Lent. We read John chapter 9, where Jesus heals a blind man by making mud and putting it on his eyes and telling him to go wash it off. And then the Pharisees call this guy on the carpet and interrogate him and try to get him to badmouth the one who healed him. And what he says instead is, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So the Pharisees take offense at this and throw him out of the synagogue. And then Jesus tracks him down and reveals himself to him so that he can see his benefactor and tells him, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. And some Pharisees nearby overhear this and realize he's talking about them, and they say, "Are we also blind?" And he says, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." And then the chapter changes, but it's the very next verse. It's the same scene that is the first verse of our reading today. Jesus changes the metaphor suddenly, though. He's not talking about sight and blindness anymore. He's suddenly talking about sheep and robbers. So his hearers are lost for a moment. What does Jesus mean? So Jesus again said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." And this sounds like very straight explanation. This is this, this is this. But maybe some of you had the experience that I suspect some of the people in his original audience also might have had, nodding their heads and saying, "Oh yeah, I thought so," and then doing a sudden double take and saying, "Wait, the door? You're the door? I was sure you were the shepherd." Because that's how it seems to be set up till now. Shepherd-robber contrast. And suddenly Jesus is saying, "I'm the door of the sheep." Well, Jesus is the shepherd too. That's very strongly implied by what we've already read. And if you go just one verse more beyond our reading, that's a very famous verse. "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." So yeah, he is the shepherd, but he's also the door to the sheepfold. And when he's called upon, when he gets a chance to explain his metaphor, that's the first thing he goes to. He doesn't just contrast the shepherd to the thief, which is an easy contrast to understand, also seems to be what the whole metaphor's purpose is. He also contrasts the door to the sheep. "I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy." Is this just a sloppy, mixed metaphor? Is Jesus getting carried away with his figures of speech? Well, let's think about this. If Jesus means to contrast the door to the thief, and I'm going to assume that he does mean to because he does it, there must be something that they share in common. That is, where the door is the good version of something that the thief is the bad version of. And the only thing I can come up with that the door and the thief share in common is that they're both ways that a sheep can get out of the sheepfold. A lamb can go out the door under the watchful eye of the shepherd and find pasture. Or he can go out under the arm or in the knapsack of a wall-scaling robber, where he finds that he himself is the food. And not only is this the only contrast that I can see that would work between a door and a thief, it also fits the context of Jesus' discourse, because the thieves and robbers in the metaphor must be the scribes and Pharisees who are directly opposing him at this point. And Jesus and the Pharisees have just fought over this blind man. They have just fought over this lamb. They have just fought over this sheep of the flock of Israel that the Pharisees and the other leaders of the synagogue were supposed to take good care of, but they have instead cast out. And for what reason? Because he heard the voice of the true shepherd. The man heard Jesus' words and saw what they had done for him and treasured those words and the one who had spoken them above all the honors and the aspersions and the insults of the leaders of the synagogue. A stranger they will not follow. And he didn't. And then Jesus found him and brought him back into God's flock through the true door, that he might be saved and go in and out and find pasture. Further than this, a sheepfold is a place where the sheep are brought together. They are led together. They are gathered together. And that is exactly what the word synagogue means. the synagogue that the man has been cast out of. It's from sun, together, and ago, lead. It's a place where the people have been led together. It's a gathering place. It's an assembly. The sheepfold, in Jesus' metaphor, is meant to stand for the synagogue that the man has been expelled from. And if it stands for the synagogue, it also, for our purposes, stands for the descendant of the synagogue, which is the church. It is a place where God's flock can be relatively safe, can, by the teaching of his word and the reception of the sacraments and the salutary influence of the fellowship of the saints, be kept from straying, from going out aimlessly by ones and twos into a dangerous world. Jesus had come to be both the door of the flock, the one in whom we believe and into whom we are baptized to enter it in the first place, and also the shepherd who would lay down his life for the sheep in order to free them from the power of the lion, the one who roams to and fro in the wilderness places, that he might be able to lead them out and find pasture, eternal pasture, in the green fields of a new and heavenly Zion. This is why Jesus can say, "All who came before me are thieves and robbers," despite the fact that he had many predecessors who were faithful servants of God. Every time I've read that, I've thought, well, what about the prophets? What about the good kings of Israel? What about the patriarchs? What about the ones who did faithfully shepherd the sheep of God in the Old Testament? And it's not just the past we're talking about. Jesus was in the process of training another batch of shepherds, or pastors, to use the Latin word, whom he would send into the world to feed the sheep that he was about to ransom. These shepherds are mentioned in our first reading, where the early Christians devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And yes, they were shepherds with a small s. They were servants and under-shepherds of the chief shepherd, the one that St. Peter mentions in our epistle reading. "You were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls." But they were still shepherds, and they were the successors of faithful shepherds from Old Testament times. So when Jesus says, "All who came before me are thieves and robbers," I don't think he's talking about the shepherds. And now we notice that the place where he makes this contrast, he is not making the contrast between the shepherd and the robber. He's making the contrast between the door and the robber. Listen, "I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door." He says it twice, like bookends around this indictment of all who came before me. There are assistant shepherds, but there's only one door. Jesus says, "I am the way to life. I am the way into and out of the synagogue, the church. I am the way to salvation and the good pasture. I am the safety of my flock." Anyone else, no matter who he claims to be, who tries to be the door, is going to lead you someplace else. He will lead you astray. Or like the Pharisees, when they excommunicated the man, he will cast you out. He will offend you in some way that makes you think you can't be part of it anymore. Don't follow them. Don't listen to them. There's only one door. There's only one safe way out of the flock of God. You can follow my prophets and apostles and pastors out through this door that I am, out through the same door by which you entered. Or you can follow false teachers and spiritual abusers out some other way, over the wall, to the back alleys and the stew pots. You will hear many voices that contradict my word. You will hear teachers who will tell you that the bread and wine that my church feeds you are not my body and blood, as I said, and that they don't give you life and forgiveness. You will hear teachers who will tell you that your baptism was nothing but water and had nothing to do with giving you life. That it was only something you were doing as some kind of testimony. Although I have told you it was a washing to cleanse you from sin and bring you in through the door into my body, the church. You will hear many voices telling you worse things, that no matter how interesting and impressive I might have been, a man who died 2,000 years ago can't possibly be of any relevance to your life now. But I have sent under-shepherds, and I will send more, so that you may hear my voice even when I am no longer walking around in flesh among you. And the true shepherds will not climb over the wall or urge you to do the same. They will come in through the door. That is, they will come speaking my words with understanding, faithful to me, rightly dividing law and gospel, calling your attention back to that door, back to your baptism into me, calling you to life. And having gone in at that door, you will also go out at that door, dying a Christian death, dying with me that you might also rise with me and go out and find eternal pasture. In the name of Jesus, amen.